I want to reply with regards to there is a review of the licensing we're on, which is I'm dealing with myself, and with regards to that is the fact. We're now reviewing 50 licences in the retail trade, 15 different authorities, which will now be, we're hoping to have 1/3 by the year end. It's important just to put on the record as well. We can come in here about rent reviews as well, but you must remember, to the last government that signed up to all the soft leases, to be honest. And I checked the leases, and you saw the generosity of the last administration on leases, and look at the clauses on them.
Sorry, Deputy.
This is a private business, and with regards to the, it's very easy to come in here with all the solutions, here with all the answers. You were long enough in government, you did nothing about them. Rest assured on that. Nothing. And we have an understanding, concern and respect for business, and we are in touch. And we know only too well it is about getting lending to banks and it's not that simple to get money to small business, because the viability, it is about confidence. It is about raising the confidence of the general public. But if you're coming in here being pessimistic every day of the week, it's not getting people confident. And exports from Ireland are on an unprecedented level. Absolutely. So it's no harm that you just get out. I'm meeting business people all of the time. All of them are as pessimistic as you make me out here. And regardless, when you take the retail trades at the moment, you must remember, during the boom in the economy, there was 13,000 square feet per head of population compared to 1,000 per head in the UK. That's the backdrop of leases. That's the backdrop we're coming from. So let's just let a small bit of straight talk here. It's not like no harm. And when we are talking about straight talk, even with Deputy Ross before he came in here, his point was talking about, it would say that if you talk about monetary policy and fiscal policy, he was the man that said that Sean Fitzpatrick was the best man that ever came into town. That was monetary policy. The government is doing its best to deal with fiscal policy, and John Moore, Secretary-General and Minister for Finance, is putting a very comprehensive package in here for SMEs, I can assure you. And I can know from others this government has an understanding, respect and is giving service to SMEs, because in the last administration it was all about the big cats. We are dealing with the small SMEs who are employing 1 and 2 people. And you look at the SME budget, this is an SME budget who is focused on creating jobs in the real economy, and the Taoiseach is very much aware of small companies. And we are dealing with there's 159, to see the report from Forfos, 159 licences in this state to do business. We are on for reducing them, getting rid of every one of them if we can. And that is the legacy that we heard. And the Minister, Noonan, has a very comprehensive fact. And Deputy Ross, I read appallingly a number of weeks ago, a major attack on Enterprise Ireland. If he went out and spoke to them, he's the business editor with a leading newspaper. If he was meeting the SMEs on the ground, he'd know only too well the role of Enterprise Ireland and what it's doing for SMEs in every region and the IDA. It's very easy to take the back shot of a local, a national paper and come out and do a major attack when in the real facts that they're doing the job on the ground, and Minister Noonan is doing a real challenge for SMEs. And certainly we are looking at late payments, the licence review, issue of bank, and the Taoiseach is beating the banks every day of the week with regards to the availability of money, and John Tretone's office of people who have been refused. With regards to rates, you know too well, being a businessman, even dropping the rates by 10%, it's not going to make a fundamental difference. But Minister Hogan is looking at that.
Can I talk about Minister? That's an outrageous statement. Outrageous statement. A drop in the rate, commercial rate, would affect the viability of some. And the sooner you do it, the better.
It's not a difference of profit and loss, because if you take the rates of an average business, 3,000 a year per euro is 310%, and the government, no rates have gone up in the last from this administration went into government, and we are dealing very effectively, Minister Hogan, the massive reform of local government. Now I go back to my script. As Minister for Small Business, I welcome the opportunity to speak on the Finance Bill in Budget 2013, and the Minister for Finance put the SME sector at the centre of this government's strategic plan for economic growth and job creation. The government recognises that the operating environment for SME remains difficult, which is the fact, and therefore we are committed to taking a range of actions to support this important sector. Deputies will be aware that in the November medium-term fiscal statement, which is all about the fiscal management of government, the Department of Finance published an economic assessment of the SME sector in Ireland, and the paper highlighted that SMEs make up 99% of business in the enterprise economy in Ireland and account for almost 70% of people employed by them. These figures show how important the SMEs are to the Irish economic life. The number highlights the importance of sustaining and generating employment in Ireland and suggests that our recovery strategy must focus additionally to support SMEs. I believe it is about confidence and about credit, and it is about buying for Ireland, supporting small companies and getting the domestic economy. But if every politician is pessimistic about the economy, people will not buy. They're saving money. That's the fact. They're not shopping local, not spending locally. And our job in government is to give an air of confidence, and that's the job of government. To that end, I very much welcome the 10-point tax reform plan announced in the budget. And this plan includes measures that will make a real difference for the SME sector, such as reforming the 3-year corporation tax relief for start-up companies, increasing the cash receipts basic threshold for VAT, amending the closed company surcharge to improve the cash flow for SMEs, and extending the foreign earnings deduction for work-related travel to certain additional countries. I think that when you look at the issue of the vintners and the point that you made about vintners and the whole, and the government are bringing a major reform on the whole reform of the alcohol trade, which is absolutely the under-cost selling, the whole abuse of the alcohol trade and the unitary cost of alcohol, and the government will be bringing forward very serious proposals dealing very effectively with the whole issue of home consumption of alcohol, and absolutely that the viability of the licensed trade at the moment is, when you see the under-cost selling of brand leaders in the state, that will be dealt with by this government. I'm also pleased to see 2 additional SME measures being included in the finance bill: the amendment of the key employee provision of the R&D tax credit regime by reducing from 75% to 50% the proportion of time that such an employee must spend solely on R&D activities, and that has to be welcomed in order to qualify for the credit, and the amendment to the employment incentive and investment scheme to permit operation or managing of hotels, guest houses, self-catering accommodation or comparable establishments to qualify for this incentive, and that has to make a real difference. And these initiatives will build upon the supports that are available to government departments and agencies and the measures introduced to support credit flow into the SME sector. The action job for plans will be announced very shortly, and you will see very clearly, Deputy McGuinness, what this government is doing to revitalise this economy in the SME sector. This government is absolutely focused on ensuring that all businesses, including SMEs, are supported in every way to develop their business, increase exports, create jobs and rebuild the economy. By far the most talked about problem in recent times facing the Irish SME sector is the unavailability of adequate credit facilities. And we all agree that is a problem. But banks will not give money to businesses who are not viable, and you know that too well, regardless of the situation. They won't, to not viable business, they won't give it. And access to finance is a key issue for SMEs, and it's critical for the long-term economic success. And we have brought in the microfinance fund, the loan partial guarantee fund, which is in at the moment, and there's even angel investors and private investors as well out there. But obviously it's all about investing for a return. Improving access to increasing access to credit is a priority which the government is addressing in a comprehensive and coordinated manner. These initiatives taken by the government to restructure, recapitalise the banking system are the principal response to making credit available, as banks will continue to be the primary and dominant supplier of credit for SMEs. And it's all over Europe. There's 23 million SMEs was at the Competitiveness Council meeting for the last 2 days, and availability of credit is an issue all over in the UK, everywhere it is. And that is the unfortunate the legacy of the financial fallout. The Action Plan for Jobs also highlights the importance of access to finance for enterprise in Ireland. In particular, the Action Plan for Jobs advocates a proactive approach to the SME sector, which is fundamental to the future of Irish business, Irish banking and the Irish economy as a whole. As a range of national initiatives have been developed to support the flow of credit to enterprises, in addition to recapitalise, restructure the banking sector, which the taxpayer has done, we're also looking at the code of conduct for business lending to SMEs, which has been done. We also established the simplified application for banking, and my department also has taken action to address some specific market failures which will add value to the actions and the Minister for Finance has taken. In particular, I refer to the 2 targeted schemes, the microfund and the loan guarantee scheme. In addition to these initiatives, the Seed and Venture Capital scheme, the Innovation Fund Ireland and the Development Capital scheme are also helping Irish companies. And the other side of credit revolves around prompt payment, and we have signed that into place as well. the late payment. Therefore, which is critical, the late payment legislation is a welcome mechanism. I think it's very important to recognise to ensure that Ireland becomes a thriving, innovative economy, which is the best small country in Ireland, which is not easy. Absolutely is not easy. And you know that you're in this job that I was in myself. And clearly, it was the recognition, support of small business absolutely vital to kickstart this economy. And this government is determined that we get out there, get confidence going, and it is about confidence and credit and getting people believing in job creation. And I know the people that I meet in the job, and I tour the country from Donegal to Cork and meeting enterprises every day of the week. To be honest, all they want to see is a sense of confidence, and they're extraordinarily confident. I was at the press fair in the RDS, and they're not talking about doom and gloom. They're all getting on with their job, getting out, finding new markets, new technologies, and they're finding another mechanism of getting funding into their business. So in conclusion, I think I would have to compliment this government on what its recognition of small business, and turning the ship around. It takes some time, unfortunately, but this government is quite determined that the critical role of this economy is SMEs, and it's at the heart of this government. And the Taoiseach has a personal motivation and interest in ensuring that we recognise every business person who are the real job creators. We don't create the jobs in here. It's the business people who create the jobs, and we've got to create the environment that will encourage them to get out and create that job. Thank you.
Noel Harrington, 9 minutes remaining.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Concorla. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak on the Finance Bill 2013. And it's obviously not a pleasant experience to talk about introducing property taxes and everything else, but I think we have to concentrate on those measures. And the SME sector that has been spoken about quite freely in this chamber is one that's going to benefit from the budget 2013 or the Finance Bill 2013. And we have to take these corrective measures. This country and this government did inherit a country, practically bankrupt, and behaviour of the previous government was, I suppose you'd have to say, reckless. The ship of state was adrift, and the officers were in the mess, and they weren't in the wheelhouse. They weren't in the bridge. And we have a problem. And I don't know of anybody in this House who would like to impose these cutbacks or who would do it lightly, but we do not have an option. The situation that we have inherited is, according to the 2012 estimates, we will take in about 55 billion, or we have taken in 55 billion, or spending 55 billion, excuse me, and taking in about 38, a deficit of 12 billion. That's about 8,312 for every man, woman and child in this country. Overspending by almost €4,000 for every person. That's an extraordinary figure, and it's one that needs to be addressed. And I know that when our Taoiseach became leader of this party, there were many things and many issues that he needed to deal with, but because of the totally dysfunctional state of the country and the economy, it was almost impossible to do it. This bill, does contain many incentives to encourage job creation and encourage economic growth, particularly in the SME sector. And I welcome the support also for the agri-sector, particularly the capital gains tax reliefs to encourage farm restructuring. These measures have been described by the ICMSA as pragmatic, a pragmatic implementation of the capital gains tax restructuring relief and young farmer stamp duty relief until 2015. They recognise the benefits of this bill, and they welcome it. I must also welcome parts of the bill that encourage the new the real estate investment trust section of this bill. It's quite extraordinary, Corla, that in the time of the greatest building boom this country has ever known, that you couldn't, it was prohibited, or I suppose not encouraged, to set up companies to develop. You had to set up like syndicates or families or conglomerates or kind of associations in something that was so running so I suppose out of control, that in other countries like the United States, where this was brought in the probably I think in the 60s, there was a measured, structured approach to construction. And it's no exaggeration, and it's a difficult thing to say, but we need a thriving construction industry to come back into this country. But we need a carefully regulated one. We need a sustainable one. We need one that will provide for employment for those men and women in this country who do not have the skills to seek employment elsewhere. That construction industry needs nurturing, as well as the retail industry. And this finance bill will go some way to encouraging those. And I'd also suggest, and I've heard, the thing that we live in a bubble, and we live in some kind of an institution where we're not in touch. But I know plenty of deputies and senators in this House, and I'm one of them, who you might describe as small employers. I employ 4 staff. And the SMEs in this country, generally speaking, want to be left alone. They want to provide for their, or encourage their own business. They want to have access to credit. They want, when they have an idea or they have a proposal or they have a way of expanding, they want to be expanded without any interference. They want to deal with the financial institutions fairly, and they want a chance to pay back their whatever loans they get. They don't want the red tape, and a lot of what's happening is we will take a lot of that red tape from them. There was a great mention of the rates, and Minister Perry is quite right in my opinion. For me, for example, who pays business rates, a 5% or 10% reduction wouldn't make or break the business, high up or low down. It would be a huge torpedo to the local authority in terms of finances, and would be a bonanza to the larger multinational companies who pay maybe 100,000 to €1 million plus rates. They'd be absolutely thrilled with a reduction in rates that they never asked for. And the businesses who are screaming, who believe rates would close them, would find an insignificant deduction in their overall bill. Rates never closed a business. It was a combination of issues that closes small businesses. Regrettably, we see them every day. I've seen one in Skibbereen over the weekend, and ones in Bantry and elsewhere. They need to be encouraged. They need to have confidence to get back into the market, to get back into an entrepreneurial spirit. They need credit. They know what they're about. They have employed staff. They know what their markets are. They want to be left alone and to carry on the work that they do. When you talk about rates, Lascion Corla and the property tax, we revert back to 1977. And the decision taken in the 1977 by that Fianna Fáil government has, I think, damaged local government for the last 30 years. Absolutely critically hurt local government. And one of the issues that we hear about in introducing a new property tax was, how punitive it is, how grossly unfair it is, and all the rest of it. Yes, it's not a pleasant measure to have to adopt, but it's a sustainable charge that needs to be brought in to support local government. And it's worth noting that in 1977, when the rate collectors were coming around to every household in this country, the rate at the time, I believe, was about 55 old Irish pounds. Whatever it was definitely the equivalent of a month's income. It was the greatest, toughest bill for any household to have. Many of them could only pay it once a month. The rate collector had to keep calling back to get it. Very few were able to pay it all in one go in the first month of the year. So put this thing into context. The property rate that is going to be introduced, for a lot of people, they'll be paying €90. For the majority in my county, in my constituency, maybe something in the region of 220. And they will be supporting local government, and they will be taking the burden from businesses like my own for the last 20 years, who have had to fund local government by something in the region anywhere from 30 to 40%. And what do you get for it? We have to get real in this country about who pays for what services. I'd also like to welcome the fuel rebate and the extension of the fuel rebate to the bus companies, the coach tours, etc. I think that will greatly add, not just to the bank balance, I suppose, but to the confidence of those operators who are trying to formulate their own business plans for 2013 and beyond, based on a tourism industry, let's face it, that is growing. It's challenging, but it is growing. And they want to tap into that and get the confidence and the assurance from government that the government will support them in their plans when they go forward to seek finance to upgrade, change their vehicles or whatever. And I think that is very, very welcome. I also welcome Lascion Corla, the changes that were announced recently in the property tax for those hard-pressed owners of the properties affected by pyrite. It's an awful situation, and I'm glad that the government has acknowledged it may not solve their problems, but it's acknowledged the situation that they're in. Also, those owned by houses owned by charities, and those occupied by people who are permanently incapacitated. Again, an acknowledgement of the government's willingness to deal with those. Lascion Corla, for 14 years, and I have to speak particularly from the years 97 to 2007, under 20 headings of various government mismanaged, wasted, white elephant ego trips. It is well documented that the waste and the government mismanagement of the time cost this state €10 million per annum per deputy on that side of the House. It's an extraordinary figure, and I go back to the point. This government has business at its forefront. It is job-oriented, and it needs to get this. That is how this country will come back, one job at a time, one SME at a time, one locality at a time, one county, one constituency at a time. That's how it's going to happen. And the ship of state, like I've said, is still in treacherous waters. But the officers are no longer in the mess, they're in the bridge. And you know, there are difficult decisions to be taken. Deputy Ferris will know exactly what I'm talking about, and I know that Deputy Ferris's compass was working all the time. Maybe once there was a slip up somewhere along the line, but you know, I think he knows exactly what happens. We're trying the best we can. We're doing the very best. The ministers of state, deputies, and it's been well acknowledged, are working extremely hard to build the reputation of this country back, to bring the confidence of the country back, and will bring the economy back, one SME, one job at a time.
Oireachtas, and the next speaking slot is shared by Deputy Peadar Tobin and Deputy Martin Ferris.
Any TD who comes into this chamber and says that there are no choices is telling a lie. Plain and simple. Anybody who's studied economics will tell you that the world of economics is replete with different theories and different mechanisms to manage an economy, different levers to pull, and different parts of the economy to stimulate, etc. So it is a lie to say to the Irish people that there are no choices. And it's important to state it in such bald facts. And the reason being is because there are different routes to achieving Irish economic regrowth. And the fact of the matter is that the government has chosen one particular one, which is, in economic terms anyway, is understood to be an extremely regressive, one of retraction, which is right-wing, and one which is based on the theory of Margaret Thatcher's economics. And we're all aware of the context of this bill, and you know, the fact that the domestic economy is hammered as a direct result of the calamitous mismanagement of Fianna Fáil. But in a democracy, by definition, there are choices. And the finance bill, as part of the budgetary process, is an example of one type of socio-economic choice that the government have made. And as I said, there are a number of routes back to growth, balanced budgets, and sustainable debt to GDP ratios. And the route that Sinn Féin ascribes to is that where commercial debt is dealt with on a commercial basis, and not the perverse Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael Labour policy that the private debt is paid for by people with disabilities through cuts in respite grants, by poor families through the cuts in child benefit, by pensioners through cuts in fuel allowances, and by targeting maternity leave. And they're all the choices that the TDs in front have actually made. The route to sustainability that Sinn Féin ascribes to is through fiscal responsibility, ensuring that those who can pay, pay, and not through the fiscal irresponsibility of the government who have renationalised the Fianna Fáil golden circle of debt. The routes to growth that Sinn Féin ascribes to is of the reduction of costs of business through the reform in upward-only rents, which the Minister refuses to acknowledge is at the source of many job losses in the retail economy, and also with reforms with regards to progressive rates. Growth through the refocusing of funds from the National Pension Reserve Fund, the European Investment Bank and the private pension industry would build badly needed infrastructure now, put people back to work now, and will create efficiencies and competitiveness that this country would enjoy into the future. These are the choices that Sinn Féin would make, and these are not unique to Sinn Féin. If the government would only open up their eyes, they would realise that many governments throughout Europe and the rest of the world are carrying out these policies currently to great success. But they would demand strong leadership. And unfortunately, we have no leadership in this government. We have a government bending to the vested interests of Europe and obviously to the various lobby groups within Irish society. To date, the economic management choices by the government has led to continuous high unemployment and has led to a disgustingly high level of emigration. And I honestly believe that one of the major costs of this government's economic plans is the shocking figure of 167,000 people that have left this state since you came into office. They face no chance of a job, collapsed living standards, far higher unfair taxes and increased costs. And many of those individuals left through no choice of their own. What's left behind is 350,000 people out of work, 60% of these on long-term unemployed. Now, these are figures that would embarrass the government of the 1980s. And in some way, your government tries to spin it as progress, that the programme for government has been implemented, that we're meeting the criteria of the Troika. These figures are economic failures in any economic measurement. There is no economic measurement, even when we met the Troika, and I asked them, is it the case that the policies that you're espousing with regards unemployment, with regards living standards and immigration, are these not economic failures? And they acknowledged that while they were getting paid back, while the debt collector was getting paid back, they could not stand over these economic indicators as being any way positive. We've also major increases with regards to poverty levels and child poverty levels, mortgage distress. The domestic economy continues to shrink, creating a cycle of economic retraction. And while the export sector is performing better, there are a major number of structural problems in this area as well. We're talking about pharma patents which are running out. We're talking actually about exports to the United States falling over the last year, and our major export markets of Britain and the rest of the EU falling in and out of recession. Now, with regards to this finance bill, from the perspective of jobs, enterprise and innovation, I would welcome a number of the initiatives. With regards to research and development, the increase from 100,000 to 200,000. Investment in research and development is investment in jobs and innovation. There are other initiatives with regards to job creation, but I have to say that I was really surprised when our party was briefed on how little evidence these policies are based upon. So, in other words, it seems to us that, again, unseen lobbyists are having policies introduced without the necessary evidence-based. Now, the changes to the tax credit for key employees engaged in R&D will reduce from 75% of their time engaged in research to 50% of their time engaged in research. We asked, why was this the case? What were the projected improvements to the system, the projected costs to the state, and the likelihood of increased investment in R&D? And your department didn't know the answers to any of these questions. The same is true for Section 9, that seeks to include additional countries in lists for which companies can claim tax deductions on employee pay. Again, your staff in the department couldn't give us any figures on how this was already working with regards to the countries that are included, and had no projections based on fact on what was expected to be achieved from the other countries that were included in these. Now, it may be that they are good initiatives. It may be that, through luck, and that these would offer improvements and growth within the market. But this is not evidence-based policy in any way. And the very least that could be expected from the minister is that these schemes that are focused on job creation are measured with regard to cost-benefit, analysis with jobs created, jobs retained, and jobs displaced. And that's not the foundation on which these initiatives were created. There are a number of other tax concessions that appear to arise from the document, and it's clear that they're lobby-based rather than evidence-based. I would ask the Minister that from now on that he would provide full assessments of the costs of these as well. And another, just while we're on the point, the airplane leasing industry has considerable tax breaks for it. And again, we don't, and we haven't been able to find out exactly what the cost-benefit of this was to the economy. The incentives to Georgian homes in the Minister's own constituency in Limerick seems again like it's stroke politics. You know, I respect the need to maintain inner city streetscapes, but when you give money to the homeowner of a Georgian house in a city, you're taking it away from somebody else. And that there's an opportunity cost there, and we need to know the opportunity cost to that particular initiative. The minor positive initiatives in this bill cannot mask the fact that the government's policies, the medicine, is actually killing the patient. And the bill will further place pressure on those in benefits and the working poor. It disproportionately hurts lower and middle income households. Excluded from the budget is a wealth tax. Now, the Minister for Finance, your Minister here, said that the wealth tax would likely bring in 500 million euros. In direct contrast to the wealth tax, you've brought in the family home tax, with completely no regard for stamp duty, negative equity, unemployment, and ability to pay. Instead, a reform to the upward-only rents, we get incentives for landlords. And the Sunday Business Post a number of weeks ago said that landlords heavily lobbied Fine Gael to stop Fine Gael reforming the upward-only rents. And we have, again, more goodies for landlords in this budget, and goodies that look like could actually reinflate the property bubble. This budget will actually suck money from the economy. It will take 3.5 billion euros out. It is a retracting budget by its very nature. And the Minister will claim that he has no room for manoeuvre. And oftentimes when you get onto a debate with a Fine Gael or a Labour person on this, they'll say, well, there's no other way. But the reason they say that is simply to close down debate, because there are other ways. There are other ways in a democracy, and economically there are other ways also.
Just you to include and to call your colleague.
Tommy, it talks quick and Dara initial, I'll ask Corley. This government has chosen to tax families rather than tax the wealthy. This government has chosen to cut benefits and give tax breaks to Georgian homeowners, and they've incentivised property developers and failed to act on upward-only rents, and they've failed to burn the bondholder, and in fact have actually burned the Irish citizen. This budget fails with regards to fairness, and it fails with regards to promoting the real economy.
I now call Deputy Martin Ferris. 9 minutes.
The finance bill, as it deals with farm-related revenue issues, has some positive aspects. Capital gains tax relief will assist in farm restructuring. The extension of the 50% stock relief has also been welcomed. However, on the negative side, the increase in capital taxes and the 10% reduction on capital acquisition tax thresholds as applies to farms will have a negative impact. Most capital taxes applied to farms are on the intergenerational transfer and do not represent an actual tax on a capital gain. That will further impede the necessary transfer of land to younger farmers, on the top of previous cuts to installation aid and other schemes designed to encourage farm transfers in a situation where a significant proportion of Irish farmers are over 65 and would like to pass their land on if the proper structures was in place. And probably one of the most negative things ever brought in was the ending of the early retirement scheme in conjunction with installation aid. Small to medium farmers, particularly in the Western countries, also suffer from other budgetary measures. Among these were the changes to the disadvantaged area schemes and the 5 million cut to the Circle Welfare Scheme. Many struggling farm families will also be severely impacted by the cuts in the Farm Assist programme, administered by the Department of Social Protection. That has played a significant role since its introduction in providing some relief for low-income farm households, many of which depend on Farm Assist to supplement income levels well below the national average. I doubt if there is any TD in this House that hasn't had representation from small family farms that are practically destitute and hungry at this point in time, and so dependent on farm assist in order to put food on the table for their families. And that was one of the most retrograde and disgraceful aspects of any budget. The cuts are actually far more severe than any other social protection programmes and entail a huge cut in farm income for many family farmers. Between the cuts made in the last two budgets, a family with 3 children would have seen their farm assist cut by 50%, from just over €200 per week to little over 100 per week now. There are currently 11,000 family farmers who are part of the farm assist scheme, but the majority of those families are in the western part of our country, and the Taoiseach's own constituency having 1,800 family farmers who rely on that scheme. Another issue that threatens farm families is the proposal to base third-level grants on the market value of land and other assets rather than the actual household income. Many farmers who have what would appear to be above-average holdings earn well below the average industrial wage, and it is unfair, it is wrong, it is unjust to effectively deny children the opportunity to attend third-level education based on arbitrary change in the criteria for the awarding of grants. Farm families and rural families in general have, of course, been impacted along with the rest of the population by other negative measures introduced as part of the austerity programme. Among them are the household tax, which has generated considerable opposition, with reports of large crowds turning out at public meetings around the country, and the campaign hasn't even started. It is also clear, as we can see from the meetings of frontline public sector workers in Tala on Monday night, that despite the utopia that was being talked up regarding the government's deal on the bank debt, that people do not perceive that there will be any benefit to them, despite the claim that the burden will be significantly reduced. Indeed, the longer austerity continues, and the more people realise that negative impact which will continue to have on all aspects of their lives, the more it will dawn on them that the extension of the debt repayment schedule with no relief for Irish people themselves is a bad deal. Indeed, the indications from the IMF and elsewhere seem to clearly signal that they would not be in the least happy if this government or its successors were to use the potential easing of the debt burden to reduce the level of cuts, or perhaps even to inject some badly needed capital into a stalled economy. One must also suspect, however, that that is finding a willing reception among members of the government who, apart altogether from the bank debt and the fiscal crisis engendered by it, are in any event ideologically omitted to cutting public provisions and attacking the public service through undermining wages, undermining conditions, and by selling off lucrative parts of state companies and state assets. It is clear that what we need is a stimulus programme, but the commitment clearly is to go in the opposite direction, including, as that does, the short-sighted sale of state assets, which could be utilised as part of encouraging economic growth. In a reply to a question I put last week regarding New Era, Minister Coveney stated that the government still intends to use it to supervise the investment strategies of state companies that would work together in certain areas, significantly in the general area of energy, which would involve the ESB, Bord Gáis, Bord na Móna and Coillte. Unfortunately, the clear intent as signalled by the McCarthy report on state assets and the government's decision to follow its recommendations is in the opposite direction, and will involve not the positive utilisation of public companies and their assets, but their sale or lease to the detriment of any longer-term plan of public investment. Indeed, one doubts whether the initial concept of New Era, which involved a specific investment sum, would be tolerated by the Troika, which is clearly opposed to any public investment in this type in order to help to stimulate growth. The lack of such stimulus and the commitment to austerity is why we have this finance bill, with the measures that flow from the last austerity budget in December. Contrary to what democratic economics and societies learned from the 1930s, some people still have not learned that you cannot cut your way out of recession. If there is a leeway in relation to repayment on the debt, then that should be regarded as a potential opportunity to inject some stimulus into the economy. The evidence from around the country is crystal clear. Just as every euro invested in growth and job creation has a positive multiplier effect, so every euro taken out of the economy has the opposite and negative input. This finance bill is part of the mechanisms of austerity by which that has been implemented, and that is why my party will be opposing it, just as we've opposed the budget on which it was based on December.
No, may the one. 1 minute.
In conclusion, Lascon Cola, I mentioned many aspects in my delivery here tonight, and particularly as I come from rural Ireland, as many deputies do here, and see the significance and the importance of small contributions towards surviving on the family farms, such as Farm Assist. The disgraceful cut by the government to that lifeline to family farms, I cannot emphasise enough. I cannot understand how rural deputies who live in rural Ireland and know the crisis regarding the family farm, the medium small-sized family farm, could come in here and vote away that lifeline. Because not alone you're voting away that lifeline, you are penalising ordinary, innocent, decent people who struggled in a way of life and kept that struggle going in a way of life, and had the last government and now this government carrying out a situation of driving them off of their holdings and off of their land. That is what is happening here. Farmers, this could help some people to get over the current impasse that is there at the moment. But by cutting that and reducing it, and by also taking away the installation aid and early retirement areas from the farming sector, has done untold damage to that community. I leave it at that.
Now there are 20 minutes in the next slot, and Deputy John O'Mahony and Deputy Darren Murphy here. So I call Deputy O'Mahony as the first name I have here.
Thanks, Concorla. And I just welcome the opportunity to speak on the finance bill and which puts into effect the measures of the recent budget. And it was like, whatever criticisms are there, and there are, and we all have them, I think we have to acknowledge that it was one of the most difficult budgets in the history of the state probably to put together, because it, especially from the fact that at the beginning it was stated that income tax wouldn't increase, that you can't tax work, and that social welfare, the main social welfare payments, would not be reduced. So difficult decisions had to be made in this one as in the previous one, but I do commend the Minister for putting in some protections and some safety nets. Last year it was taking 300,000 people out of the universal social charge, and this year there's a number of them too that I'll come to later. But I suppose it's not enough. We'd all like to see more, but the reason, I think, and we mustn't forget the reason for some of these difficult decisions, is because of the recklessness and bad decisions of previous governments, and we cannot just take everything and not balance the books in some ways. And in that context, I'd like to compliment the Minister Noonan and his team for the promissory notes deal 2 weeks ago. And again, I think everyone acknowledges it's only one step, and maybe a small step, but in many respects, it will be a major step in helping the country to regain economic sovereignty again. And what I would hope that would come about as a result of that is that it would give some flexibility in future budgets to allow more safety nets and more protections for our low and middle income families in particular. Many of those families, and I've talked to many of them over the last couple of months, that, you know, Deputy Ferris referred to small farms and the Farms Assist. But a lot of those families are also affected by other things like the child benefit pay, reduction and the lack of where they're eligible for student grants or having to wait for their student grants or whatever. So there's a lot of difficulties here, and I think we have to acknowledge that there has been a lot of pain taken by those people, in other words, that are just above the line on low incomes. And I want to particularly refer to the Farm Assist thing, because there are 1,800, I think, and 15 or 1,820 people on Farm Assist in my own constituency of Mayo. And what that did was it provided a safety net for farmers on very low incomes, and due to the reductions in some of the farm payments, they got Farm Assist, which helped them. But the present situation, or the changes that are proposed here, is a married couple with 2 children on an income of 15,000 a year, which is, is a very small income. Will see their payment reduced from €131 per week to €83 per week. Now, this doesn't apply to people on family income supplement. So I would say that there's a discrimination against the small farmers here. And also, we must remember that it's only people that are on Farm Assist that qualify to get on the Rural Social Scheme, which means that their employment prospects are affected as well. As well as that, just the child benefit changes that were announced in this budget, and even the proposals that we've heard about in the last 24 hours. I intend to follow this and say that, the child benefit is something that is vital to thousands and thousands of families around this country, and whatever proposals are brought in the coming budgets or finance bills or whatever it is, there needs to be a restructuring where the higher incomes suffer most of the reduction, or all of the reductions, I would say, in regards to child benefit, and that people on low and middle incomes don't suffer any more reductions in child benefit.
Thank you. Just to say, Deputy, I take it you're sharing with Deputies Darragh Murphy and Billy Timmins, but you have 1 minute remaining.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I want to give a bit of balance to this. I want to welcome the provisions in it, for instance, for the extension of the fuel rebate to the licensed transport holders. It was announced for the hauliers, and again, this is protecting thousands of jobs around the country, and it's also enabling and supporting our tourist industry and helping the growth that we all much yearn for throughout, and also to support the changes in the SME sector and the farming sector, where for transfer of lands and consolidation of farms, because that will allow farmers, it will encourage the transfer of land to younger farmers and to consolidate their farms and be more efficient and be more productive. Finally, I note just 2 small provisions that maybe won't bring in a whole lot of finance this year, but the relief for the universal social charge for people on high earnings over 70 years and people over 100,000 on self-employed pensions, the increase in that, I think that has to be the way to go in future budgets and in future finance, that there has to be more of the pain, if you like, taken by the high income earners.
Now call Deputy Darragh Murphy. 6.5 minutes.
Thanks. You might tell us when I have 2 minutes, please, last John Corda. I also very much welcome the opportunity to speak on this year's finance bill, and to say that this, I suppose, continues a succession of measures over the last couple of years to restore the economic prospects of our country. We, I think, can say now that the deal on the promissory note, and there was much discussion about whether it was sustainable debt or not sustainable. It's probably now true to say that it was unsustainable and now has moved to a far more sustainable level. Our foreign direct investment sector remains strong, and we have a balance of payments level that would be the envy of most countries on the planet. And of course, some mention was made by members from Sinn Féin about stimulus and austerity. This year, we are injecting massive stimulus by way of €15 billion, which will be reduced to 12 over time. And that, by any measure, is a stimulus. It's a borrowed stimulus. And the rule, I think, that Sinn Féin seem to not wish ever to accept is a simple rule of economics that income and expenditure over time must balance out. And that is not the same as austerity. That is a simple rule that applies to every household, every business, and indeed every economy. And I think that path is a very, very difficult path, of course, because we were spending beyond our means. But there is no other option, and there is no silver bullet. And while some of the sectors of our economy are now showing signs of improvement and strengthening, the one area which gives rise to the most concern and which needs the most urgent address by this government is the area of domestic demand, which remains very weak. And there are measures such as the increase in deposit interest retention tax to try and stimulate spending. But it is, I think, the challenge for all of us over the next couple of years to look at measures whereby we can increase domestic demand. We have never, I believe, had such a level within our country of domestic saving. And while many people in the country are certainly in very difficult banking circumstances and have a large amount of debt, there has never been so much money held on deposit in our banks. And I think we do need to look now at creative measures that will allow people, perhaps through the tax code or indeed the VAT code, where people will be incentivised further to encourage them to take some of the money that they have on deposit and indeed spend this in the domestic economy. And I believe this can be targeted and could be targeted, particularly in areas such as construction and other areas like that, where there is a very high level of employment, and of course the services are predominantly supplied by Indigenous and Irish-owned companies. And I know that there are schemes, for example, in Canada, where percentages of VAT are allowed to be reclaimed by private individuals when they have spending within certain parameters and on certain scale, and indeed when the people who are engaged, the businesses who are engaged in the provision of those services, also qualify by virtue of tax clearance
2 minutes remaining,
and employment levels. That was a very quick 6.5 minutes. There's two other areas that I think need to be addressed. Firstly, in Dublin and in Cork, it's hard to believe we are now moving, and perhaps even in much smaller cities like Limerick, there is now a very the possibility of a shortage of large office space. And I think we are going to have to look at a scheme. It seems a year or two ago that this would have been a ridiculous suggestion, but some tax incentives, and particularly perhaps to look at publicly owned land for the provision of large office space. I know in my own city of Cork, we are now arriving at a point where some very large office space has all thankfully been filled. And I think the IDA in particular deserves huge credit for that. The other area, very briefly, Glasgow and Cora, is the area of the property tax and how the valuations apply to houses who've been affected by flooding. This isn't just an issue in Cork, though my own constituency in Blackpool, Ballyvalant, Glanmire and other areas, but I know it affects Dublin and other parts of the country. A valuation for a house that's flooded is different for a house, the exact same house, perhaps even in the exact same suburb, that is not subject to a flood risk. They can't receive insurance, and I believe that some provision should be made whereby some account is taken on the value of a property that is subject to a flood risk, while perhaps flood remedial works may be coming down the line, or whatever else, because if a house can't get insurance, if it is subject to flooding, then its valuation cannot be deemed to be the same as a similar property in, as I say, in perhaps a very, very similar location. I think that is something I was mentioned by my colleague Pascal Donoghue from Dublin earlier, and I think it is something that won't perhaps affect a vast amount of properties, but for the people involved, it is a very, very serious issue.
Now call Deputy Billy Timmins, 6.5 minutes.
Thanks, Lascian Carlo. I'd just like to take up the point mentioned by my colleague, Deputy Murphy there, on the issue of property tax and insurance. I believe it is very, very important that the Minister, and I would ask his officials and Minister down here to take note of this, to take on board the view that there are a large number of properties out there cannot receive insurance due to flood risk. I know in my own county in the areas of Bray, Arklow, Baltinglass and several other towns, householders have approached me long before the concept of property tax was mentioned that they could not get insurance due to flood relief, and we've got to look to put some sort of measure in place to compensate or recognise the difficulty that these people have. You know, I welcome this budget. There's a lot of measures in it that are very progressive, and I also welcome the fact that the Minister has taken on board some suggestions since the publication of the budget to bring in measures that are progressive and try and help the economy back on its feet. I called to a friend of mine recently, a business person. Like most business people, he's not in the best of form for the last few years. And he outlined to me, Minister McKinley, the amount of various bodies he had to deal with: the local authority, health and safety, health inspector to do with catering, health inspector to do with tobacco control, the fire officer, and IMRO. That's before he ever went to deal with the traders, revenue, or his customers. So I welcome the fact that the Minister for Enterprise and Employment is going some way to trying to deal with the difficulties in the bureaucracy that businesses are encountering. The same individual recounted to me, and I went to the Lincoln Film recently, so I hope these statistics are fairly accurate, that the Gettysburg Address contains somewhere in the region of 272 words. 272 words, the Gettysburg Address, yet EU directives on eggs contain somewhere in the region of 10,000 words. So, you know, that might tell us something. 272 words, Deputy OD, the Gettysburg Address, and 10,000 words on eggs and EU directives. Now, my grasp of attention to detail isn't very good, but I know that Deputy OD has a lot of spare time in his hands now, and he will go away and research that for me and come back corrected or otherwise.
You've 5 minutes left, Deputy.
Sorry?
You've 5 minutes left.
5 minutes left. How many words have I spoken in the last hour, Corla? Well, I could say in 5 minutes what most people take 30 minutes to say. You know, so I welcome these measures to small and medium enterprise, because retail is dying on its feet. If you drive through this country, be it north to south or east to west, irrespective of where you go, retail is dying on its feet. Every night in most provincial towns is like a Christmas night at this stage, bereft of cars, bereft of people. So any measure we can do, notwithstanding that it's hard to stand in the way of the changing habits of people and their purchasing habits, we've got to bring in measures to actually facilitate them. I want to deal with a few small measures that are actually in the budget itself, and I'll start at section 16. For a number of years, I've raised with previous Minister for Finance and this Minister the concept of releasing money that's caught up in pension funds. And it's very welcome that we've made a start here. The 30% of AVC should be extended, but I believe that the 30% which is included for AVCs should be extended to other categories of pensions. It's difficult to understand how someone may have invested in their firm or in their company, an employer or whatever. Money is caught up and then they can't get access to money from the banks, and we won't release this money or won't permit the release of it, because it's important to realise that it is subject to actually taxable. It is a taxable income. If the money is released, tax will be paid on it. So I would like to see the Minister extend this measure. I welcome the Section 20 film relief, very important in our own particular county, and I would be a strong advocate of tax reliefs. Notwithstanding, I know it was populist to hit the stud fees a number of years ago. I disagreed with the removal of it. I think it helped the industry tremendously at the time, and we shouldn't shy away for reliefs where we believe they're actually important. Section 21 extends the time frame for the EIS scheme and its remit to include hotels, guest houses, self-catering and accommodation for a 2-year trial period. However, some counties are precluded from this Dublin, Meath, Wicklow, Kildare, Cork County and City, excluding the Docklands in Cork. Deputy Murphy, you'll be interested to hear this. That a business in your company, small to medium enterprise, someone in it, cannot invest in it. They can invest in it, but they won't get the tax relief that they might get across the border in Tipperary or somewhere. I believe that this is inequitable. It's unfair to the counties. There may have been a logical and pragmatic reason for bringing it in during the boom time period from the point of view of having regional growth and regional balance. But there are parts of those counties, my own county is one I particularly think of, where areas are definitely as impoverished as anywhere else in the country. And I would ask the Minister to go back to the EU and see about getting this issue dealt with so there's a fair playing pitch. It's difficult to understand how a hotel down in Galway or in Mayo or Kerry or whatever can avail of this tax relief, and yet a hotel in parts of southwest Wicklow can't. Actually, we don't have very few, if any, hotels in that area because we don't have the tourist numbers. Section 24 deals with the donation of heritage property, and I'm glad to see that extended to include outbuildings, lands and gardens. But I note that the tax relief has been decreased from 80% of the value of the property to 50%. Now, I believe that this, if I read it correctly, is a retrograde step. One, because the value of properties have decreased anyway, and I think we should be encouraging where people hand over property, and I think of Altamont Gardens in Carlow as a classic example where a property has been handed over to the state, and it's of huge benefit to the state. I see Coolatin House down in the golf club in South Wicklow again, a house that if it came into state ownership was done up could be of huge benefit to the country. I'd like the Minister in his wrap-up response to outline why this measure has been taken. I see it retrograde rather than actually progressive. How much time have I left to ask?
Just 1 minute remaining.
1 minute. In the final minute, I'd like to